Rehan and welcome to 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. In this video, I'll start the political science of class 11th Humanities. Now, I have already completed the history of this class 11th and now we have come on to the part of political science. Until now, you have studied about political science in previous classes, in previous classes 9th and 10th. But that was a different thing because there you just had one book to study. In class 11th, you have got two books to study. First one is political science that we're covering right now in this video. The next one is going to be something a little bit different, but that is about the polity of our country, and that is political theory. So that is going to be a little different and somewhat interesting as well. So in this video, I'll explain the political science, the chapter 1 of that book, and its name is Indian Constitution at Work. So the first chapter of this book is Constitution, why and how. So Constitution, why and how. Now before we get into the chapter, you should know that what this book is going to cover. In this book, we're going to have a look at everything about the Constitution, like the president, the prime ministers, that has been allocated, that has been written in the Constitution, what it is about. It is about the fundamental rights, the institutional arrangements, and a lot of different things. So basically, in this book, we'll study about the Indian Constitution, how it works, like what are the functions, features of this Constitution. But before we get into the Constitution, like we discuss about elections, about governments, about presidents and prime ministers, we should know what a Constitution means. So that we'll see in this chapter. In this chapter, we'll talk about the Indian Constitution, basically Indian Constitution, but yes, we will also see that why we need a Constitution. At the first place, what is the need for the Constitution for any of the countries? After this chapter, you will get the answers of some of the questions such as what is a constitution, what role does it play for society, why do we even need a constitution, and how just is it, how does it contribute to the society, to the development of the society. So we will see about different functions, about different features of constitution in this particular chapter. But in overall whole book, we're going to cover about constitution, about its work, like all the features that have been written on the constitution, how they work, what they actually mean, we'll see in the following up chapters. So let's get into the chapter without any further ado with the first topic, that is, why do we need a constitution? So why do we need a constitution? Now first, it is asking a question why we actually need a constitution. When we talk about constitution, like you have been studying about constitution maybe from class 6 or 7th, and you have been studying a lot of things about it. But this time it is going to be different because we are in a higher class and we need to study in a bigger picture as well, in depth as well, and to the point. So that is why we need to understand what is a constitution and why we need it. There are many questions that rise up, like what is a constitution, how was it made for India, what role does it have, and many features, functions of the constitution. So we will study about those features, like why do we need a constitution, with different topics that are coming up. So the first feature of the constitution is constitution allows coordination and assurance. So constitution allows coordination and assurance. Now first thing in the Indian society that you have to recognize is a diversity. We have a lot of diversity in India, no matter what it is. Like we have different religions, different type of people, their tastes are different. Now when I say taste, it doesn't mean that some like to eat sweet, some like to eat spicy, but that means their taste in different social things, what they wear, their clothes types, their cultures, their rituals, their religions, all these are different. Their opinions might be different, like something that we need to give right to vote for every student, for every person above the age of 10. Some might think no, we have to give it around above the age of 18. So there can be difference of opinions as well, there can be difference of taste, there can be difference of diversity of backgrounds as well. So there is a lot of diversity in the Indian society. society. No matter where you go, you have to find, like, in local cuisine, in local things, in their newspapers, their languages, what they talk about, how they talk about it. There are a lot of diversities in India, and that can lead to social conflicts as well. Like if there are two people and they are of these just the opposite opinions, like I say something different, you say something different, but if we're in a debate, of course there will be conflicts going on among us. So that is why, to deal with that conflicts, what would be the solution? Because with those conflicts, with such a diversity, we have to live together, because we are dependent upon each other. Rich people are dependent on farmers, aren't they? Like for their food, and farmers are also dependent on the rich people because they buy their, like, crops, their harvest. So every person is dependent on each other in one way or other way. So that is why we have to live together in India. So for living together, what is needed? How can we live together with such a diversity, with so many social conflicts? How can we live together? The first answer may be to set some basic rules, not just in India, not just in society. We can see this in different other aspects of life as well. Like if you take the example of cricket, maybe football or a club, you have to see that, you will see that there are some basic rules which everyone has to agree upon. Like there has to be some basic rules on which every person can agree on and has to abide by it. So that is why we need the Constitution, because it is the way of coordination among different people of the society, of different diverse groups. Some are tribal communities, some are scheduled castes, some are upper classes. So for coordination among these people, what we need is some basic rules upon which everyone has to agree upon. So that would be the first thing. Now we have to see that we need basic rules. Why do we even need that? Because we can think that what other person can do to us and what I can do to that person. So that would depend on it as well. Then secondly, it must be legally enforceable. Now when I say legally enforceable, that means that not just you are following that rule, but every person must follow to it. For example, we have traffic rules in India that you have to stop by the red light, but if you don't, if the other people are not following that rule, why would you do so? So if nobody is following around you, then would you ever think about following it? No, you wouldn't. So that is why it must be legally enforceable, that if one person does not do so, he or she will be punished according to whatever she or he has done. So that depends that first it will give the coordination that yes, everyone is agreeing on some basic rules, that yes, we have to live together. Like in football, what do we have? Even if you're in a team and if you don't like that person because he's from this region or maybe he speaks different language, but still you can't use foul in the game because it is the basic rules which you have agreed upon coming on the field of football. So the same happens in real life as well, like in the society as well. Then after, it can give assurance in the way that yes, it is legally enforceable. So that is why the first function of the Constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for a minimal coordination amongst the members. Now you have to notice amongst the members of the society it means. So that would be the first function of the Constitution, for which why we need a Constitution. Secondly, we have specification of decision-making powers. The specification of decision-making powers. Now the Constitution is a set of fundamental principles on which a government is constituted and how a country runs. Now there are some questions that may arise in your mind and that should arise, that what are fundamental, what exactly the term fundamental here means, and what rules are there that have to be called as fundamental in the Constitution, and above all these, who gets to decide that these are fundamental or not? Who is the person or the group who is deciding that yes, these are fundamental or not? So these are many questions related to Constitution. We can see that yes, who is the main decision making power, who has the power to make decisions in our country, that has to be specified as well. Well, there can be different answers depending upon the form of government. Like for example, if you go in a monarchy, If you go into monarchy, you will see that this decision making power is allotted to the king. Of course, he will do all the decision making powers. He will have all the decision making powers. If you go to a dictatorship and suppose he has chosen, like, that person, that dictator has adopted a constitution, still the main decision making power would be in the hands of that dictator. Same goes for one party rule. And if you go to the democracy, then in a democracy the people are the most important. So of course this decision making power would be in the hands of people. Still, it is not the complete answer. If the people are the one who gets to decide, yes, the constitution is enforceable, these are fundamental rights, fundamental principles or not, then second thing is that how do the people get to decide? Like, is it going to be a referendum, or what the historians did, like Greeks did, ancient Greeks did? You know what, that these ancient Greeks were doing kind of referendum. They were directly voting for every purpose, for every decision. There was a referendum going on in the whole Roman Empire, and every Greek, what he would do is that he would vote. So is it the same in our country or somewhat different? Well, if you go by the constitution, you will see that this power has been allotted to the parliament because it has the representatives, the elected representatives of the people, and that is why they get to decide what should be done or not done for our country, the main decision making power of the country. So we can say that the second function of the constitution is to provide, the second function of the constitution is to specify who has the decision making powers in a government and how the government will be constituted. It decides how the government of any particular area, if we're talking about India, will be constituted, whether it will be elected a representative or something else. So we have to see that if we are having a constitution, it also specifies who has the power to decide what, who has the power to do so, like who has the power in this department or that department. So that has been specified particularly by the Constitution of India. So that could be the second feature for why we need a constitution. Thirdly, we have limitations on the powers of government. So limitations on the powers of government, like we have said, yes, we have done the allocation of powers, we have given who has the power to make the decisions for the country, but that clearly is not enough. Suppose you chose a leader and he is making rules and that are unjust. So what if he said you can't wear black or red, you can't wear some particular color's clothes, and you can't eat this or that, you can't go to cinemas, and there are many rules like people from this background are not allowed to go there. So that would be unjust and discriminated rules. So that is why we can be sure that if we have chosen that person, if we have elected that person, he would definitely be good. He or she would be definitely good for the people. So that is why some limitations have to be on the power of the government or those who have the power to make decisions for the country. So that is why Constitution is there for it. The third function of the Constitution is to impose some limitations on the government, is to have some limitations on what a government can impose on its citizens, and that can be never trespassed, that may never be trespassed by the government, and that can be done in many different ways. Like if we are talking about the Constitution of India, it can impose limitations by giving some particular specific rights to the citizens of India that are known as fundamental rights. So that means that we have been given some certain rights which cannot be challenged by the government or those in the power. There are many fundamental rights, like we will talk specifically about them in the next chapter. And secondly, there can be some limitations posed on the government as well. Like we have elections every 5 years. Of course, if they are doing something wrong, of course in the next elections they want to be chosen a leader from particular party or maybe some independent candidates. So we have a lot of fundamental rights, and we also have a very independent judiciary as well. So we have been given these powers by the Constitution of India because it says that people are the most important or the powerful in a democracy. So that is why these fundamental rights have been bestowed to us, and they can never be challenged. They can only be reduced to some extent only in the case of national emergency or some specific conditions. So that we can say that could be the third function of the Constitution, to pose the limitations on the government. The third function of the Constitution is to limit the government on what it can impose on the citizens, and the government may never trespass these things. So that would be the third function of the Constitution. For why we need the Constitution, these could be the features or the points that you can write or you can learn. Then next we have aspirations and goals of a society. So aspirations and goals of a society. Now what happens then, many of the constitutions of the world have been limited to the decision making power, to specification of decision making power and allocation of power, and the limitations on the government. But these are not enough for society, and that very good example for it could be the Constitution of India. Many 20th century constitutions have been ahead of these things. There is a third function included in them as well, and that, of course, the finest example, one of the finest example is of India. There are many things. It is not that we only have to pose limitations on the government or those in power, but we also have to make them enable to do something that would be to the aspirations of the society or of the people. So the fourth function of the Constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspirations of the society and create conditions for a just society. That means that, suppose if we take the example of South Africa, what was there before the Constitution was made? Of course, there was a lot of racial discrimination. So to fulfill that aspiration of the people, what they could do is that, of course, if they are making Constitution, they could write that there should be no racial discrimination. And for India, it goes for the caste discrimination. We had seen a lot of caste discrimination before the Constitution was enacted. So we have now enacted it in our Constitution that no, there can be no caste discrimination in our country. So that is to fulfill the aspirations of the people, of the society. Yes, they had done this or that to fulfill the aspirations of the society. Suppose there are some marginalized groups in our country. So to improve them, to upbring them, there could be some provisions in the Constitution that would be to fulfill the aspirations of the society, of the people. So to fulfill the aspirations of the society, we need to do something. It is not that the government will just sit down. It has to fulfill what we are expecting from it, to fulfill the expectations of the people, and of course to create conditions for a just society. What if the country is just unjust? It should not be so. So we need to maintain a balance. So that is why it could be the next feature of our Constitution, for why we need it, the importance of the Constitution. And the last but not the least feature is fundamental identity of a people. Now, fundamental identity of a people. Now, till now we have seen 4 features, if I am correct. We have seen 4 features about the Constitution. Now, this one is going to be something different. You know what? That Constitution also gives us political, moral, and national identity to all people of our country. How is it so? If we leave the Constitution, and when we talk about moral philosophy, moral something identity, where does it come from to us? It of course comes from our ancestors, our forefathers, of our grandfathers or our elders from our family. They teach us that this is wrong, this is right. They teach us some ethics things. But if we go to the Constitution, it also gives something that as a citizen what you need to do. As a citizen, you know, you should never damage public property, those things. So that also, the Constitution also gives you moral identity, not as a person but as a citizen of your country. You have to follow these certain things. We have fundamental duties enshrined in the Constitution. So that would be in Article 51A, of course. So that is about giving you a moral identity of how you as a citizen should behave in this country. Then talking about political identity, yes, it does give. We have the fundamental rights. We can go to the courts for demanding of our rights. So of course, it gives us political rights as well. And then next we have national identity as well. When we talk about national identity, of course it is talking about citizenship, those kind of things. When you go to Germany, German citizenship is like that only the German ethnicity people have the certain citizenship rights, but that is not so in our country. In our country, every person born here is a national citizen, no matter what caste he is born in, what religion he is born in, or what ethnicity he has, but still he is a citizen of India. He or she is a citizen of India. So that how political, moral and national identity. National is something big and something bigger than you think, because national identity is considered of to be utmost importance for a person living in a country. Like patriotism, we have different terms related to it as well, but particularly talking about national identity, it means that you have the citizenship of that country as well. Moral identity, how you have to behave as a citizen. And then political identity, of course we have those so many different rights. So that is why we have these three identities given to us by the Constitution of India. How you can say that I'm living in this country and I'm following this constitution? Aren't you following the Indian Constitution? You are following it, aren't you? Like when you go to the market, you are following. When you go to somewhere, you do follow these rules. So they have been there because of the Constitution. Why is it so that even after these many years, our Constitution is still the Indian Constitution that we are following? So that would be something that these identities have been given to us by the Indian Constitution. Now the next topic we have here is the authority of a constitution. So the authority of a constitution. Now there are some questions, like we have seen, yes, why we need constitution. Now let's leave it. We have seen that why we need it. Now coming to the next part of it is that there are some questions related to the constitution. The three most important questions here are: what is a constitution? Secondly, is it effective? And third, how just is the constitution? Is it really just? And if it is, how just it is? Now, if we go to answer the first question, that what is a constitution, in some, like you could say, some previous classes, in some, you could say that some lower classes you have studied about constitution, that yes, there is a definition that we have to memorize, that yes, the constitution is a book in which all the rules and regulations are given, but that is not true. We have seen just now that not only the rules and regulations are given in the constitution, but there is a broad meaning to the constitution. There is a lot of institutional arrangements in it, and there are a lot of things. So we can say that it is a document in which everything about a country, like how a country should be governed, is given. Then there is another question, that is it written or unwritten? Many people think yes, it is a book, it is written. Of course, Indian Constitution is written, but not all the constitutions around the world are written. Like if you take the example of British Constitution, the Constitution of the United Kingdom, it is unwritten. There is no specific book which you can call as a constitution in in United Kingdom. There you have different acts being passed, different types of documents being passed, and together they are called as a constitution. There would be different acts, different things going on, different orders issued in the United Kingdom, and that combined together would be called as the Constitution of the United Kingdom. But for India, we have a written constitution. So constitution can be written as well as unwritten. It does not matter. A simple definition of a constitution could be: Constitution is a document on which a government, a country is constituted. It specifies the institutional arrangements, all the rights of the people, and what should be and not be done in a country. So that is what a constitution basically means. Now further when we go, is it really just? How effective it is? Now for being how effective, we have to look at the mode of promulgation as well, how it was enacted and how it was made. Then we'll come on to the part that how it is just. Is it just or not? So coming on to the next topic we have here is mode of promulgation. So mode of promulgation. Now when we talk about mode of promulgation, it basically means that how the constitution came into being. Now when we talk about constitution coming into being, there are many examples of some very successful constitutions, such as of South Africa, that of United States, and that of India as well, where these countries made their constitution after their national movements, like being inspired by their national movements, as they had to get their independence from some colonizers, and that is why after that they made their constitution, as there were a lot of national movements there in their countries as well. So that would be the first thing, that how these constitutions came into being. Now when we talk particularly about India's case, of course national movement was there, like a long chain of national movements were there, but it was not exactly so that we were inspired by the national movements. There were some other certain immense pressure as well why the constitution was made like this. You know what, that our constitution was not made just after the national movement, but after a long period of time. It almost took 3 years for our constitution to be made. So that is why we can say that there are a lot of processes going on while making our constitution. Now when we talk about our Indian constitution, you know what, that the framers, the makers of the Indian constitution were credible enough, because they had the popularity of the people. Like there were many countries who had the desire to do referendum, and that they did do so. That for making constitution they did referendum, that is getting the vote directly from the people. Of course it was not proposed in India, the referendum methods were not adopted in India for making the constitution. Still, the leaders and the makers of our Indian constitution were very credible. They were very popular among the people. That is why even at that time people liked and were ruling, were abiding by the provisions of the Indian constitution. So that would only be so if the leaders are credible enough, and they are not doing so. They are not making the constitution for their own personal matters, for their own personal profit. It would not be so. So that is why the desire, you know what, that the Indian constitution still lives among the hearts of the people, and still people are abiding. It is not just a mere piece of paper, but it is more than that. That you know what, that this constitution has lived up to now, that would only be so because we are changing and we are doing certain things in the constitution. So the mode of promulgation, the leaders of our, the makers, the leaders of our constitution were credible enough. Then they had the capacity to negotiate with the problems, to overcome the problems, and to negotiate different sections of the society as well. Like there were different sections in our country during that time as well. The partition also took at that time. So there were many things going on. Still, these leaders had the capacity to negotiate with these problems, to overcome these problems as well. So when we talk about mode of promulgation, first thing would be of course the national movement. Then the next thing would be the legitimacy of our constitution comes from the leaders themselves as well. Now the next topic we have here is the substantive provisions of a constitution. Now the substantive provisions of a constitution. Well, if you have a constitution in your country, then what is the most needed thing? That you should have some reasons to go along with that constitution. Suppose there is a constitution and it is just providing the rights to the majority, giving more and more privileges to the majority, then will the minorities have any reason to follow that constitution? Of course they won't have. And if it is just the vice versa, only the minorities are given privileges more and more, then would the majority have any reason to follow that constitution? Of course they won't have. So every person has some reason to follow that constitution. The two basic things in every constitution around the world that every person has the reason to follow that constitution is freedom and equality. Every person wants freedom for his life. It could be freedom of press, freedom of you could say belief, faith, expression. These freedoms, of course, equality is also one of the most important things that we need as a person with full dignity. So that is why every constitution has some substantive provisions according to the country, according to the situations of the country, that in such a way that every citizen has some reason to follow that particular constitution, and that is also seen in our country. In our country, freedom is provided, equality is provided in our constitution. It is clearly enshrined in it. So that is why the substantive provisions of any constitution matters the most, because how effective, that would be the next thing. But what is written in the constitution also matters, because we are following that constitution only if it is benefiting us, if it is giving something to us. Suppose if you did not have any liberty, any freedom or equality according to the Indian constitution, then would you believe it? Would you want to follow it? Of course you would not. So the importance of the substantive matters, substantive provisions of any constitution is not very low, it is very high. Then nextly we have balanced institutional design. Now, balanced institutional design. You know what, that there are many constitutions in the world that have been subverted by a person or a group of people. It could be some institutions themselves as well, but Indian constitution is designed in such a way that it cannot be subverted by any person. One way that you have already read in in class 9th and 10th of doing so is the horizontal division of powers. We have a lot of institutional arrangements in our country and a lot of institutions as well to maintain check and balances in our country. We have the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and apart from that we also have some statutory bodies such as the Election Commission of India, and we have a lot of bodies are there. So you could say that we are maintaining the checks and balances in our country in order to not subvert the Indian constitution. Suppose if the elections are going on and the legislature and the executive have tight hands that we will do cheating this time, of course Election Commission of India has the power to stop them. So that is what happens. They are maintaining the there is a kind of balanced institutional system in our country. No institution can have the monopoly in any part of the constitution in India. That would be if it is doing, then other institutions can track it and also challenge it. So that would happen in the Indian society only if there are a lot of provisions for the balanced institutional arrangements, and that has also been given to us by the Constitution of India, like the horizontal division of powers, the vertical divisions of powers. Like vertical, we have central and state governments. So there are different divisions of powers in our country. You remember the power sharing chapters that we talked about, that we studied in class 10th. So that is the same thing we are discussing right now, that power sharing is also very important, that we are having a balanced institutional arrangements. If party A, if A institution is doing mistake, then other institution can check it and even can if it is doing very much wrong, it can challenge it and reduce it to some extent. So that would be a balanced institutional arrangement that we do have in our country. Then the next topic we have here is, how was the Indian Constitution made? So how was the Indian Constitution made? The first thing we have to know is that how was it made? How was the Constitution of India made? Of course, when we talk formally, it was made by the Constituent Assembly. We have been discussing, we have been reading about it. The Constituent Assembly of India was the constitution making body of our India during that time in the past. Now, when we talk about the Constituent Assembly, of course, we have a lot of methods going on as well. It was not just that it was just chosen and it was made from December 1946 to November 1949. The Constitution was made in this period of time, and after that, 26 January 1950, this Constitution was enacted, was adopted. Now you do know the reason behind this, that why this date was chosen as for enactment of the Constitution of India when it was already made some months ago. That was because of Purn Swaraj, that we had taken the oath of it. We had taken Lahore session of the Indian National Congress, what happened that in 1929 they had chosen the date 26 January 1930 as Independence Day of India, that they would gain the Purna Swaraj or complete independence, full independence on that day, but that did not happen. So that is why they chose that day as for enacting the constitution of our country, and that still is celebrated as the Indian Republic Day till now. So that is why how the constitution was of India was made like that. When we talk about the Constituent Assembly, how it was elected, of course it was elected by the members of Legislative Assembly that was made around the British rule. Under the British rule there were two types of territories. The first ones were the princely states, the next ones were the province. So princely states had their autonomy and province were under the direct control of the British Empire. So what happened that the members from these provinces and princely states had to choose these legislative members had to choose the members of the Constituent Assembly from their regions. So what happened that they had to choose according to the their population. The ratio was 1:10 lakh. So among 10 lakh people there was one member of Constituent Assembly that was chosen by these members of legislative assemblies. Well, the provinces had 292 seats while the princely states had 93 seats. So there were total of around 385 seats. So when you say that there were less to princely states and there were more to the provinces according to their population. That province, what they were doing that they had one single transferable votes. While talking about the princely state, they had the method of consultation for the election of the members of the Constituent Assembly. So that is how the Indian Constitution was made. Now talking about the next thing is that composition of the Constituent Assembly. So composition of the Constituent Assembly. When we talk about Constituent Assembly, of course it was not directly chosen by the people. Still, every effort was made to make it more representative for our country. Like the members of the Constituent Assembly were chosen from all over the regions of India. Like there were provinces all over the country. So of course people from all over the India were chosen, were elected, were indirectly elected by these members of legislative assemblies. Then also we have there was partition that came up. So after the partition there were only 299 members in the Indian Constitution, because the members who were chosen from the territories of Pakistan were ceased to be the members of Indian Constituent Assembly. So after the partition, the Indian Constituent Assembly had 299 members and 284 of them had actually signed the Constitution when it was about to be enacted on the 26th November 1950. So on that day, 284 members of Constituent Assembly did sign on it, and after that we got our lovely Constitution. Then when we talk about Constituent Assembly, how it was what were the efforts to make it more representative, let us talk about them as well. First of all, there were around 28 members from the scheduled castes. So of course they were given a lot of representative. Then after, when we talk about political parties, of course the dominated one was the Indian National Congress with about the majority of 82% in the Constituent Assembly. But that was a different thing. Even in the Indian National Congress you would find a lot of diversity. You could find a lot of diversity that some were lawyers, some were against each other. That is why Congress was also divided at some point of time. So that is why even if the party was the same, there were different types of people going against each other in some matters, in some views. So we cannot say that Indian National Congress was the only party ruling over the Constituent Assembly, because there were different type of people. Like we have Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and some other people. Then there were different people who were going against each other, and for each and every clause of the Constitution, debates, arguments did happen. So that is why we cannot say that the Indian Constitution was not representative enough, because it was, and that is why people chose it as well. People decided to believe in it, and at the time that when it was enacted, people did abide by it, people did follow it. So that could only be possible if the Constitution was credible enough in the way it was made, because the people at that time would only know that what was right and what was wrong for them. So that is why we can say that how the Constituent Assembly was made, that was a different thing. In composition of Constituent Assembly was not unfair. It was fair. Like, we did have a lot of representatives, because at that time there was immense pressure. Indian Constituent Assembly did not make the constitution only under the pressure of national movement, but it was under the immense pressure of partition that left a lot of impacts on the members of the Constituent Assembly as well. Then after, they also learned about different things that happened in the partition. So when they saw that yes, there could be some conflicts like this in the future as well, that is why they included citizenship without, despite of the religion you were born in, despite of the caste you were born in, and to reduce the social conflicts as much as possible, they did make provisions in the Constitution. Apart from that, they also tried their best to cope with the situations. Because what we have is that you can kind of know that when the Constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, there was partition. So after the partition, they had seen a lot of deaths, they had seen a lot of killings of the people. So that would enable them to make some laws to counter that thing in the future as well. So in the future, there would not be any second partition of our country. So that is why still we are living very peacefully with this much diversity. So that shows the composition of our Constituent Assembly as well. They were different thinking people. They were not just lawyers or some kind of judges there in the Constituent Assembly. They were different type of people. Then after, we have the next topic, that is the principle of deliberation. So the principle of deliberation. Now when we talk about how a Constituent Assembly was deliberate to make the Constitution, it matters also. Like, how much did it pay attention to making of the Constitution for the nation, not for themselves. That could be seen in Indian Constituent Assembly as well. Although they were representative, like broadly speaking, the Constituent Assembly of India was representative enough in geographical matters, in social matters as well. The thing that was to be noticed is that they were not there for their personal benefits, for their personal faith, but they were there sitting as a member of the Constituent Assembly for making the Constitution of India, for making it for the nation. So that is why it has to be noticed that no member should have been there to for his own purposes, for his own personal benefit or the benefit of his or her own group. So that is why there should be that for whole nation the Constitution is being made. And that could be seen in the Indian Constituent Assembly as well. Although there were a lot of debates and arguments, there were some instances where people were debating over their own personal benefits, over their own personal gains. That should not have been so, but there were some instances in those debates and arguments. Overall, when we talk about the Indian Constituent Assembly, there were overall a lot of good aspects of the members of the Constituent Assembly, like how deliberate they were to make the Constitution of India as they did make. And the thing is that when they were debating or arguing over something, some clause or article, they had to give some reasons, some logical reasonings, some scientific reasoning, something that could be called as a reason, not as a mere fact for the personal gain. And that what we might associate with the term public reason. Now, public reason was a term that was associated with it, that you have to be, as a member of the Constituent Assembly, you have to give public reason, that this reasoning I am giving as a member of the Constituent Assembly for the benefits of the public, for the benefits of the people, of the nation. So that is why this public reason was really needed in any Constituent Assembly of the world. Now in India, there is one thing to be noticed. If we talk about the Indian Constitution, the basic thing of the Indian Constitution has always been to maintain the core basic values of it and to adapt with the social circumstances over the period of time, so that it would not be too rigid or too flexible. if the Constituent Assembly, if the Constitution of India is very much rigid, then what would happen that at some point of time it would have to break down, it would have to disappear, because the time is changing, the people are changing, and people's views are also changing. The thing that had been written in the Constitution of India around 50 years ago or maybe 70 years ago, that cannot be the same for today, because the world has changed. Nor it should be too flexible, because if it is too flexible, of course it would not have that much importance among the people of India, among the citizens of India, because it should maintain its position as of very bold, majestic. So that is why it should neither be too rigid nor too flexible. So that has been decided by the Constituent Assembly, that was decided by the Constituent Assembly, because we are seeing that many constitutions around the world are very much flexible, that they don't matter that much to the citizens, and there are many constitutions that have been vanished because they were too rigid. So that is the point, that we need to maintain the core values of the Constitution, adapting to the circumstances over the period of time. Next we have procedures. Now, what were the procedures for making the Constitution of India? What were the procedures? How exactly was it made? The Constitution was made in different procedures. There were some different committees. It was not that every article was written in the presence of all the members. No, it was not so. Because over the time period of 2 years, 11 months, there were around 160 meetings that were held. So in those settings, what did actually happen? Because at that much time, they only had this much meetings, because the different committees were there to make some different provisions of the Constitution. In our Constitution, every article had been debated, leaving except just one article, one fact or one law that you can say was the universal adult suffrage. Right to vote for every person above the age of 18, no matter what caste he is belonging to, no matter the religion, the property, the wealth and everything, because this was the basic, the foundation of our Indian Constitution, the right to vote. So that is why it had never been challenged in the Constituent Assembly. After that, every article was debated on. So when we talk about procedures, first of all, there was a drafting committee. Now this drafting committee had drafted a constitution and some provisions were there. Now these provisions were being debated in the Constituent Assembly meetings so that they would be finalized and would be made into a constitution. Well, the chairperson of this drafting committee is also the architect of our Indian Constitution. Well, you do know who I'm talking about, of course, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So there were some you could say that some well-known names, some prominent names such as Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Sardar Patel, who were given the chairman, you could say leadership of some different particular committees that were divined, that were to make some different provisions, some particular provisions of the Constitution. So that is why, that after that those provisions were made, they would be debated, then they would be finalized, and then the consensus would be made in a meeting of a Constituent Assembly. Then only it could be written in the final Constitution. That book was made. So we can say the procedures for any article in the Constitution was like that earlier it was just drafted in a rough manner, then it will be debated by the people in the meetings. The president of the Constituent Assembly was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So we have the Constituent Assembly and then we have the drafting committee as well. So we can say that these were the procedures by which different articles, different institutional arrangements in our Constitution have been made. Now coming on to the next topic we have here is inheritance of the nationalist movement. So now, just I said some topics ago that yes, the most of the successful constitutions around the world have been written by after being inspired by their nationalist movements. So what about India? Did we have nationalist movement? Of course we had. Even before, you know what? It was not that just at the right moment in time, all the members of the Constituent Assembly came up and they just made the constitution. No, it was not so. For a long period of time, some things were being made after people, you know, in nationalist movements we had people around India, like from all over the India, that came over and were like united. So they were giving their own prospects, their own like perspectives, aspects, their own opinions, beliefs, views. So after studying those things, there were many leaders who had come onto some points that yes, if the constitution is being made by us, then of course these points would be included. A very good example would be like objectives resolution proposed by Nehru, like Jawaharlal Nehru. Now in this objectives resolution, it was kind of like even before the Constituent Assembly was made, it was a kind of draft of some basic rules, laws that Nehru was sure that we would include these things, these particular laws in our finalized constitution when it will be made after years. So that was kind of thing. Of course these were included because in objective resolution some things were like some basic rights were there, like such as sovereignty of India, unity and integrity of India, the ideas of freedom, equality, liberty, fraternity. These were given in that objectives resolution. About the union of India, it was given that India would be union of India. So these things were included in the constitution with some modifications, because we can't just accept everything that we are getting. So we have to say that yes, we were inspired by the nationalist movement and we did adopt a lot of things from those nationalist movements, because there, when the nationalist movements were going on, of course there were people from there were different people of from India. So that is why we could see that what the people were really expecting from if the constitution was made. Of course that was before the Constituent Assembly was made. Now next, moving on, we have institutional arrangements. So institutional arrangements. Now as I have said that for a constitution, what is important? We had seen that yes, what are important? How was the constitution made? That was the first thing. We did talk about the procedures. Then the substantive provisions should be there in a constitution. Of course there are in our constitution as well, like how it was inspired by the nationalist movement and how we have included not too flexible nor too rigid. Then the third thing comes up that balanced institutional arrangement should be there in any of the constitution. So when we talk about Indian constitution, well, you can see that there are a lot of balanced institutional arrangements in our country, if we're particularly talking about, because in our country we have horizontal power division and vertical power division as well. Like we have the executive, the legislature and the judiciary. Then we also have like central government, state government. We have adopted from different countries, like not we, but yes, the framers of the Indian constitution have adopted a lot of things from different constitutions, and it is a very good thing that they were not just parochial but were freely like adopting things from around the world that were beneficial to them, and that was not just salvaged imitation, because there were modifications according to the need of India. So that is why when we say about the institutional arrangements, of course we can see that yeah, there are a lot of institutional arrangements if you go by the paper and if you go by the road, because you can see that Election Commission of India, the judiciary that is very much powerful, the judicial independence that it has got, that is something related to institutional arrangements, that how these have been made, the Prime Minister, the President, the powers that they have been given. So that is the example, a very good example of a balanced institutional arrangements. Now lastly, the next topic and the last topic of this chapter, we have provisions adapted from constitutions of different countries. Now just as I said that for institutional arrangements in our country we did adopt a lot of things from different constitutions. So what were they? Let us talk about them as well. Now, first of all, when we talk about the British Constitution, we did adopt a lot of things, like the Government of India Act 1935, that was proposed, that was enacted by the British government at that time. British was ruling. There was British Empire in India. That is still there in India. Of course, there are modifications, but it is still in India. Now, according to British, what we have adopted from it is there are a lot of things. The rule of law, that is not rule by law but rule of law, that is in India. Then we have the institution of speaker and his or her role. Then we have a parliamentary form of government in India, that is also adopted from the British government. Nextly, we have the Irish Constitution. From the Irish Constitution, we have adopted the Directive Principle of State Policy, or DPSP, according to which we have a lot of principles, directive principles. Then we have the United States. From the United States, we have adopted the Charter of Fundamental Rights, according to which fundamental rights are given in our country. And then after, from the United States Constitution, we have also adopted judicial review power of judiciary and the judicial independence as well. From the Canadian Constitution, we have adopted kind of quasi-federalism form of government. That is, we have in India, we don't have complete federalism, but a quasi-federalism where center is powered more than the state government, but still is a federalism. So we have adopted not just from these constitutions. Of course, there are more constitutions from which we have adopted, like the framers of India Constituent Assembly had adopted, and that was a good thing, because if we can take the things that are there according to our needs, then it would be beneficial for us, and that would not harm the other person as well. So that is all we have covered in this chapter. Now remember the questions that I asked in the starting of the chapter, that you would get the answer of these questions in the ending of this chapter. Of course, you have gotten the answer of those questions. So basically, we have seen in this chapter what is a constitution and what exactly is a constitution as well, how effective it is. We have seen different features of it, why we need that, we have covered that. Then after, is it just or not? Of course, it is just, because we need there is a need in every country for a constitution, because for everything, no matter where you go, if you go to a school, if you go to a club, if you go to a party, there are rules. There are some certain rules that you have to follow. So that applies for the country as well. Then we have also seen some different features of the constitution, and particularly how Indian constitution was made as well, and some good things about the Indian constitution as well. So that is all I have covered in this chapter. Now the next chapters of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.